My husband's family will be living here now, so get out." The words fell into the air like shards of glass, each one finding its way into my chest. My mother-in-law didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Cruelty, when practiced for years, doesn't need volume. It only needs precision. I stood there, still holding the mug I just filled with tea, the steam fogging my vision more than the tears I refused to shed. My husband, Daniel, sat on the edge of the sofa, pretending to scroll through his phone, pretending he wasn't a part of this humiliation. The ticking of the wall clock seemed louder than the sound of my own heartbeat. "Where to?" I asked quietly, my voice steady despite the tremor in my fingers. She turned, pearl earrings glinting against the sharp light that poured in through the open curtains. "Go to the dump," she said flatly. "That's where garbage belongs." For a moment, time seemed to stop. She waited for me to crumble, for me to beg or scream or fall to my knees. I had done that once before, early in my marriage, when her disapproval was still a wound. I thought I could heal with good behavior. But I had long since learned that nothing softens a heart that thrives on dominance, so instead I smiled. It was a small, controlled smile, the kind that hides a secret no one else can see. It was not forgiveness. It was not defeat. It was the smile of someone who has finally decided she's done trying. I set the mug down carefully on the table, still half full of tea I'd made for her, out of habit, not affection. "All right," I said, my voice surprised even me. "I'll go." Her brows twitched barely, but enough. She had expected tears. She wanted the satisfaction of watching me collapse into pleading. When she didn't get it, her victory soured. Behind her, Daniel finally looked up. His eyes flickered to me, uncertain, guilty, but not enough to speak. He had always been like that, good at pretending that silence meant innocence. I gave him one last look, memorizing him as he was in that moment, a man who had chosen comfort over courage. I walked to our bedroom, my bedroom no longer, and began to pack. My hands moved with a calmness that startled me. 2 suitcases, one filled with clothes, another with the few personal things that still belonged to me. My mother's jewelry box, a handful of books, a folder of important documents. I left the wedding photos on the shelf. They were already ghosts. From the doorway, I heard her voice again. "Hurry up, we'll have guests tonight." Guests. She was calling her son's betrayal a family gathering. I zipped the suitcase slowly, letting the sound stretch through the air. When I stepped out into the hallway, Daniel stood there, his phone forgotten in his hand. "Anna," he said quietly, his voice cracking, "maybe you should stay with your sister for a few days, until things calm down." I stared at him. "Things are calm," I said softly. "You've just lost your wife and don't even know it yet." He looked away. I brushed past him without another word. When I stepped out the front door, the winter air bit into my cheeks. The street was quiet, except for the rustle of leaves tumbling across the pavement. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the cold until my lungs ached. Behind me, the door slammed shut, the sound of finality. That was the moment my marriage ended. Not with a fight, not with an affair, not even with tears. It ended with silence and the sound of that door. The bus station was nearly empty when I arrived. I bought a one-way ticket to the city and sat on a wooden bench that creaked beneath me. The woman behind the counter gave me a curious look, as if she could sense that I was running from something. Maybe she could. I didn't look like someone starting fresh. I looked like someone discarded. As the bus rolled out of town, I watched the familiar streets disappear. Each corner held a memory I didn't want: birthdays, arguments, laughter that had turned false. The house itself had always felt like a stage where I played the obedient daughter-in-law, careful not to miss my cues. I had cooked their meals, ironed their clothes, hosted their guests, and in return, they had given me instructions on how to live my life. Now, as the fields stretched out before me, and the house shrank in the distance, I felt strangely light. For the first time in years, I had no one to please. That night I checked into a small motel on the edge of the city. The room smelled faintly of detergent and rain. The window faced a row of dim streetlights, and outside the world looked unfamiliar and full of possibility. I sat on the bed, still in my coat, and allowed myself to exhale. They thought they had thrown me away. They thought I would vanish quietly. But what they didn't know was that I had left with more than my suitcases. I had left with the truth. In the bottom of my bag was a folder documents my mother, in law, had once asked me to file, too distracted to realize what she was giving me. Deeds, transfers, business accounts. Her signature repeated across papers that would not stand a legal test. I hadn't thought about them in years, but that night, in the sterile light of the motel, I pulled them out and looked at them for a long time. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. Instead, I felt a calmness deeper than any I'd ever known. When I had been told to go to the dump, she thought she was sending me to rot among ruins. She had no idea that I had walked away carrying the foundation of their downfall. I turned off the light, closed my eyes, and smiled again, this time wider, freer, not a cruel smile, but a knowing one. A week, I thought, maybe 2. That's all it would take for the balance of power to change. And when it did, they would finally understand the cost of discarding someone who once would have done anything for them. The morning after I left, the world felt too quiet. It was the kind of silence that only follows an ending, thick, heavy, filled with invisible echoes of everything that used to be. The motel room looked smaller in daylight. The wallpaper peeled near the ceiling, and the air smelled faintly of bleach. I sat by the window with a cheap cup of coffee and watched the street come alive. Delivery trucks, a woman walking her dog, a boy with a school bag running to catch the bus. Ordinary life. For the first time in years, I was outside of it, a spectator, not a participant, but I wasn't broken. I had left everything behind, yes, the house, the furniture, the life I had built around Daniel, but I had carried something with me far more valuable, my self-respect, and a folder that couldn't change everything. Still, revenge, if that was what this was, couldn't be rushed. I had learned that in the hardest way. If I struck too soon, it would look like bitterness. If I waited long enough, it would look like truth. So I decided to wait, and while I waited, I worked. I found a job within 3 days at a small cafe, 2 blocks from the motel. It wasn't much, just washing dishes and wiping tables, but it paid in cash, and the owner, Mrs. Patel, didn't ask questions. She was a kind woman with tired eyes, the sort of person who had seen too many people start over to be surprised anymore. She handed me an apron, pointed to the back sink, and said, "If you can survive the morning rush, you'll be fine here." I did survive. Barely. My hands were raw from hot water and detergent, but the rhythm of it, the constant motion, the clinking of plates, the hiss of espresso, kept me grounded. Work was mercy. Work was the one thing that didn't lie. After my shifts, I would return to the motel, sit on the creaky bed, and open the folder. I began to sort through every document like I was cleaning a wound, carefully, methodically. There were property deeds under my mother-in-law's name, but the signatures were odd. One looked like Daniel's, but it wasn't his handwriting. The date was off by 2 years back when Daniel was working abroad. Another document showed a transfer of company shares to a trust that didn't legally exist. She had been moving money, hiding assets, pretending to be clever while assuming no one was watching. I was watching now. A week passed, then another. The motel bill grew, but so did my certainty. I needed help, but not from a lawyer yet. I needed someone who could confirm what I suspected, someone who understood the small corruptions that polite society ignored. That's when I met Mara. She was a quiet woman in her late 30s who came into the cafe every morning, always ordering the same thing, black coffee, 2 sugars. She worked at the local bank branch, which I knew because she wore her name tag clipped neatly to her coat. For days I didn't say a word beyond polite greetings. But one morning, when she saw me wiping down a table near closing, she hesitated. "You used to live in Greenfield, didn't you?" she asked. I froze for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, you knew the family." Her lips tightened, not unkindly, but knowingly. "Everyone knew them," she said softly. "Your mother-in-law had accounts at our branch. Always thought she owned the place." Something in her tone told me she didn't like the woman much. So I took a chance. That night, after closing, I found her in the small park across from the cafe, sitting with her coffee thermos. I handed her the folder. She didn't open it immediately. She just looked at me, her brown eyes calm but sharp. "You know," she said, "people who cross that family don't usually come out well." "I'm not crossing them," I replied quietly. "I'm just showing the truth." She studied me for a long moment before finally flipping the folder open. Her eyebrows lifted slightly as she scanned the documents. "Forged," she murmured after a while. "Several of these are bad copies. The notary stamp is real, but the handwriting isn't. And this trust," she tapped the page with her nail, "doesn't exist. Not legally." Her voice was calm, factual. But there was a flicker of admiration there, too. "You kept these all this time?" she asked. "I didn't even know I had them until I left," I admitted. "She asked me to file them once. I guess she forgot I'm good at keeping things safe." Mara smiled faintly. "Good. Then keep them safe a little longer. The bank has been suspicious for a while, but no one had the courage to speak up. If you give me permission, I can make a few calls quietly." I repeated. The word felt like a promise. For the next few weeks, I lived in a strange rhythm, mornings at the cafe, nights spent poring over evidence, occasional meetings with Mara in hidden corners of the city. She became my first real ally, not because she hated my mother-in-law, but because she loved fairness more than fear. She taught me things: how to read financial statements, how to trace shell companies, how to follow the trail of a fake charity donation. The more I learned, the more I realized how deeply the family's rot had spread. Every generous act they'd bragged about, every donation to the community center, every scholarship fund, all of it was a mask for theft. And Daniel, he had known. Maybe not everything, but enough to stay quiet, enough to choose comfort over conscience. That was his betrayal. Not infidelity, not cruelty, just silence. One night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the motel window and watched the city lights blur through the rain. My reflection in the glass looked older than I remembered, not just from exhaustion, but from clarity. For years, I had been the one who tried to smooth things over, to forgive, to keep the peace. Now I understood. Peace built on lies is just a prettier kind of war. I wasn't angry anymore. I was patient, and patience, I realized, was the sweetest form of mercy. Mercy for myself, first, for all the times I'd stayed silent when I should have spoken. Mercy for the truth, which deserved to see daylight, but not mercy for them, not yet. They hadn't earned that. By the end of the month, Mara had done what she promised, quietly, carefully. The bank had launched an internal audit. Nothing public, nothing scandalous, not yet. But I knew how these things worked. The smallest ripple could turn into a wave if it touched the right shore. When I left work one afternoon, the wind was sharp and cold. I stopped at a payphone, an old one near the bus stop, and dialed a number I still remembered by heart. Daniel answered on the third ring. "Anna," his voice cracked. "Where are you? I've been worried." "I'm fine," I said simply. "Just wanted to tell you something." He hesitated. "What is it?" "I hope your mother's keeping her paperwork in order," I said, "because people are starting to look closely." There was a long pause. "What do you mean?" "You'll find out soon enough." And before he could ask more, I hung up. That night, for the first time since I'd left that house, I slept soundly. The city hummed outside my window. The air smelled faintly of rain and coffee. And my heart, for the first time in years, was calm. I wasn't rushing fate. I was building it, quiet work, quiet mercy. That's how you dismantle an empire built on arrogance. One quiet truth at a time. The first sign came quietly, as most important things do. Mara sent me a message on a Tuesday morning while I was stacking clean cups behind the cafe counter. Just 4 words, asterisk it has begun, be still. Asterisk I read the text twice, then tucked my phone back into my apron. The cafe hummed with its usual rhythm, the hiss of milk steamers, the clink of change, the murmur of half-heard conversations. But underneath it, I could feel something shifting, like a low vibration in the bones of the city. It had begun. The audit, the questions, the unraveling of everything they thought untouchable. That afternoon, I left work early and took a walk through the market. The air smelled of roasted nuts and rain. I didn't buy anything. I just watched people, their gestures, their laughter, the easy way they carried their lives. I had forgotten what normal looked like. For years, I'd lived in a house where every conversation was an inspection, every smile a strategy. Now I was a ghost walking among the living, and I preferred it that way. Ghosts can see the truth more clearly than the living ever do. I found a bench near the old fountain and sat down, the sound of water masking the rush of my thoughts. I wondered how Daniel was handling it, if he was pretending everything was fine, or if he'd finally started to understand that silence, too, can be criminal. Mara's next call came that evening. Her voice was brisk, but not unkind. They've frozen one of her accounts, she said. Not all, not yet, but enough to make her nervous. And someone from the regulatory office called this morning. Anonymous tip. I smiled into the receiver. Anonymous, I repeated. That's a good word. It is, Mara said, but be careful, Anna. They'll start asking questions soon. If she suspects you, she won't. I interrupted softly. She thinks I'm broken somewhere, crying in a corner. That's the only version of me she can believe in. There was silence on the line for a moment before Mara chuckled. Then let her believe it. A few days later, I saw them again, not in person, but in the local newspaper. A small article tucked away on the 5th page. Asterisk investigation into charitable fund mismanagement underway. Family sources deny wrongdoing. Asterisk it wasn't much, but to anyone who had lived in their shadow, it was a spark in a dry forest. By that weekend, the spark had spread. Business associates started to whisper. Some pulled out of deals. One of the companies under Daniel's management temporarily suspended operations, while auditors reviewed their books. In less than a week, the fortress they'd built around themselves had developed cracks, and the most satisfying part. I hadn't needed to lift a hand. The truth had done the work for me. I had simply given it the space to breathe. Still, the strange part about revenge is that it doesn't feel the way you expect. You think it will come with fireworks, with vindication, with cheering in your head. It doesn't, it comes with silence. A soft, almost mournful quiet when you realize the people who hurt you are finally facing the consequences, and instead of joy, what you feel is a kind of peace laced with pity. That's what I felt the day Daniel found me. He showed up at the cafe unannounced. I was wiping tables when I saw him standing outside the glass door, pale, thinner, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. For a moment my hands stopped moving. When I stepped outside, the winter air was sharp. He looked at me like a man drowning who had spotted a piece of drift. Would he wasn't sure he deserved to hold on to? Anna, he said, his voice barely a whisper, can we talk? I nodded toward the alley beside the cafe. 5 minutes. We stood beneath the weak glow of a street lamp, surrounded by the distant hum of traffic and the smell of coffee grounds. He rubbed his hands together as if trying to summon warmth. Mother's, she's not well, he began. The stress, the accusations, it's tearing her apart. We didn't know anything about, don't lie. I said quietly, you knew. You might not have known the details, but you knew what kind of woman she was, and you stayed quiet because it was easier. He flinched, but didn't deny it. "That was something. I didn't want this to happen," he murmured. "I never wanted to hurt you. You didn't have to want it," I replied. "You just had to watch it happen and do nothing." He closed his eyes. "They're saying someone tipped off the auditors. Was it you?" I looked at him for a long moment. Then, instead of answering, I said, "Do you remember what your mother told me the day she threw me out?" His eyes flicked up, uncertain. "Anna, she told me to go to the dump." I took a step closer, my voice calm, even gentle. "Tell her I found something better there, a clean conscience." He opened his mouth to speak, but I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. If I had, I might have seen the beginning of his collapse, and I wasn't ready to feel sorry for him yet. Within a week, the story broke in full. The national papers picked it up. Asterisk, prominent Greenfield family under investigation for fraudulent charitable activity. Asterisk, it was no longer rumor, it was fact. Names were printed. Photos too, Daniel's pale, nervous face beside his mother's defiant one. I read the article over breakfast in the cafe's break room. The hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the room. Mrs. Patel glanced at the headline and then at me. "That's your husband, isn't it?" she asked quietly. I folded the paper neatly. I corrected her. She didn't ask anything else. She simply poured me another cup of coffee, her expression unreadable. Some people sense when a story is too heavy to touch. The days that followed blurred together, lawsuits, frozen assets, a police inquiry. Former friends of the family avoided them in public. Invitations were withdrawn. The house that had once glowed with parties now stood shuttered and dim, like a mausoleum for pride. And me, I kept working, kept saving, but beneath my calm there was something else growing, not bitterness, not triumph, but a strange tenderness. The same tenderness you might feel toward an animal that once bit you and now limps past, toothless and small. It was then that I decided to go back just once to see it for myself. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The garden was unkempt, the hedges overgrown. Through the tall iron gate, I saw Daniel on the porch, talking to someone who looked like a lawyer. His mother sat behind him in a chair, wrapped in a shawl, staring out blankly at the road, as though it no longer belonged to her. I didn't go in. I just stood there for a while, hidden beneath the shade of an old oak, watching them shrink beneath the weight of their own lies. And there, standing on the same street where she had once told me to go to the dump, I finally understood what my smile meant that day, not malice, not defiance, but a quiet prophecy. Because I hadn't gone to the dump. They had built it for themselves. I left a small envelope at the gate before walking away. Inside was a single note written in my neatest handwriting. Asterisk, I didn't ruin you. You ruined yourselves. I just stopped pretending not to notice. Asterisk, no threats, no gloating, just truth, the most merciless form of revenge. That night I returned to my tiny apartment above the cafe, poured myself a cup of tea, and looked out over the city lights. The world was quiet again, not heavy this time, but calm, balanced. The truth had done its work, and as the steam curled upward, I caught my reflection in the window. That same smile, small, soft, almost secret, curved my lips again. It wasn't the smile of a victor. It was the smile of a survivor who had finally learned how to breathe without fear. The morning news no longer mentioned them. For months their names had filled the papers, the Greenfield fraud, society family under fire, matriarch's legacy in question. Then slowly, like a fever breaking, the world lost interest. Another scandal took their place, another name became the gossip of the week. That was the real cruelty of downfall, not the fall itself, but how quickly people forget the ones who fall. By the time the final investigations ended, their empire was dust. The family's businesses were either sold or seized. The grand house that had once glittered with parties was now locked behind police tape, an A for auction sign. Even the pearl earrings my mother-in law used to wear, those sharp little symbols of her pride, had been sold to pay legal fees. And me, I had expected to feel triumphant. I didn't. What I felt instead was a strange, quiet grief. Grief not for them, but for everything I had allowed them to take from me before I learned how to stop them. The cafe became my world, and in that small, fragrant space filled with chatter and clinking cups, I found peace. Mrs. Patel made me her assistant manager, not because she pitied me, but because she said I had the hands of someone who knows how to build things back. That compliment meant more than any apology Daniel could have ever offered. With the extra pay, I moved out of the motel and rented a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. The walls were bare, the furniture mismatched, but it was asterisk mine. Asterisk every item in that apartment, every plate, every curtain, every creaking floorboard, was something I had earned honestly. There were no hidden signatures, no debts disguised as gifts. At night, when I made tea and watched the city lights shimmer from my window, I often thought about mercy, not the mercy they had denied me, but the kind I wanted to carry forward. Revenge had done its job. Now it was time for something gentler to take its place. A month after the last of the court cases closed, I received a letter. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable, Daniel's. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time before opening it. Asterisk Anna, asterisk asterisk, I don't know what to say that you'd believe. You were right about everything. I should have spoken. I should have stopped her when I still could. Mother, she's gone to live with an aunt in the countryside. I lost my job. I don't know what happens next, but I think about you every day. I'm sorry. Asterisk asterisk, if you ever need anything, anything at all, you know how to find me. Asterisk asterisk, Daniel. Asterisk, I read it twice. Then I folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer beside my bed, not out of affection, but closure. There was a time when those words would have cracked me open. Now, they were just the sound of an old door closing quietly in another part of the house. People like Daniel don't mean to be cruel. They just choose peace with wrongness over war with truth. And when the truth finally catches up, they mistake its footsteps for betrayal. Later that week, Mara visited me at the cafe. She looked tired but satisfied, like someone who had seen justice and was content to stop chasing it. They've liquidated everything, she said as she stirred her coffee. There's nothing left. The authorities even seized her personal accounts. I nodded. Then it's over. Over, she agreed, and you're not even smiling. I shrugged. There's nothing to smile about. I didn't want to destroy them, Mara. I just wanted them to stop destroying me. She gave me a look, part admiration, part wonder. You're stronger than you think. No, I said softly. I'm just finished with pretending weakness is virtue. That evening, I took a walk through the part of town where no one knew my name. The air smelled of lilacs from the street vendors. The sky was streaked in gold and violet, the kind of beauty that arrives without fanfare. I passed a small community hall, one I remembered vaguely from the charity projects Daniel's family used to sponsor in name only. Now, the place looked forgotten, its paint peeling, its windows dusty. A faded sign still read * Greenfield Family Foundation Center. * for a long time, I just stood there, staring at it, the hollow symbol of all their lies. Then, almost without thinking, I pushed open the rusted gate and walked inside. The caretaker, an older man with a limp, looked up from sweeping the floor. "We're closed," he said apologetically. "I'm not here for service." I replied, "I'm here to help." He blinked at me. "Help? I used to be connected to the people who owned this place," I said. "They used it for the wrong reasons. I'd like to turn it into something better." He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. We could use another pair of hands, and that was how it began. Every weekend, I went back to that hall, cleaning, painting, fixing, organizing. Word spread. Soon, other women joined, single mothers, widows, women who'd been told they were too small to matter. Together, we built something new. ***, a community learning center, ***, offering free workshops, food drives, skill-sharing circles. We called it the Haven. When the first class opened, a sewing lesson taught by a retired teacher, I stood at the back of the room and watched the laughter, the small triumphs, the soft murmur of women rediscovering purpose. I realized that this was my true revenge, not the destruction of a family, but the creation of something good from their ashes. It felt like justice reborn as kindness. Months later, I received a visitor I hadn't expected, Daniel. He arrived one gray afternoon, wearing a simple coat, no longer the polished businessman I remembered. His eyes had softened, not with charm, but with humility. He stood in the doorway of the hall while I was arranging chairs. "I heard about this place," he said quietly. "They said you started it." "I did," I replied. "We're rebuilding what your family claimed they cared about." He nodded, looking around at the bright walls and handmade posters. "You did more good with it than we ever did." Silence stretched between us, not bitter, just final. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was the ring he had once slipped onto my finger, back when love had felt simple. "I thought you might want it back," he said. I looked at it for a long time, that small, glittering circle that once meant forever. Then I closed the box gently and handed it back. "No," I said, "keep it. It's a reminder of what? That some promises should stay broken." He smiled, sad, genuine. Then he left without another word. I watched him go until he disappeared into the rain. I didn't cry. I didn't hate him. I simply wished him peace. When I returned home that night, the city lights shimmered through my window. My kettle whistled, filling the room with warmth. On the table lay a stack of applications from women wanting to join the Haven. Every name on that list felt like a small victory, not for me, but for every woman who had ever been told to go to the dump and decided instead to bloom where she was thrown. I took a sip of tea and let the quiet wrap around me. The world had turned as it always does, the powerful had fallen, the forgotten had built something new. And I had learned the most important lesson of all. You can lose everything and still end up rich, if what you gain is yourself. A week later, I walked past the old Greenfield estate one last time. It was being demolished, bricks piled high, ivy torn from the walls. The sight should have brought satisfaction. Instead, it brought peace. The house that once silenced me was finally silent itself. I turned away before the dust rose and walked toward the bus stop, where children were laughing, life moving on as it always does. As the wind lifted the hem of my coat, I smiled, the same quiet, knowing smile that had started it all. Not a smile of revenge, not even of victory, just the soft, enduring smile of a woman who had learned that when a house built on cruelty falls, you don't stand in its ruins. You build another one, stronger, kinder, and entirely your own.